that we would formula where we would review that allocation either annually or every 3 years or every 5 years and determine, if it stayed the same or if it needs to be adjusted.
So looking at that 5545, the cost or the payments that DPW receives on the weekends from folks that are dropping off refuse goes to Shorewood to offset.
So there's actually a that material isn't weighed.
Right.
So what we did, and I think that's outlined in the letter that I wrote to previous director Edelbeck, which is included in the packet. We came to an agreement that on any given Saturday, the average tonnage is X. I don't recall what we said it was. Then that would be calculated in to so Whitefish Bay would be credited that amount because Shorewood keeps the money, the cash money that comes in.
It's a credit system as opposed to us keeping the money straight up our facility.
Correct. Because so
I guess I didn't know. I didn't see that there was a credit involved. I assumed that we kept it.
That's relatively new.
Okay.
At the time that the transfer station was built, it was the process was set up so that Shorewood was billed by Waste Management and Shorewood paid the invoices, and then we billed Whitefish Bay for their material cost that came into the station. A number of years ago, Whitefish Bay replaced all of its refuse vehicles and purchased vehicles that were actually too big to use the scale. So we switched to a method where the Village of Shorewood still pays the bill. And then instead of subtracting the Whitefish Bay tonnage from the total, we subtract our tonnage from the total and bill them whatever's left.
Okay.
But in doing that, they're now assuming the costs of all of the Saturday material disposal fees, which is why we came up with that credit system where we know, about what comes in on a Saturday. We credit them the cost to dispose of that, but then we keep all the money that comes in. So it's never exactly a wash, but it's the best I can get to making it an even accounting.
Do you have any ballpark that total
Which
annually that is received Saturday
drop? It's in the budget.
Okay.
I will say I cash receipted Saturday's disposal fees, and it was about $1,600. That also includes fees paid for electronic recycling, and those are just pass-through fees. So we charge actual cost for that and then are billed for that.
I have a question. Do you know why it was not updated in 2021 or since then?
I think it was a proposal that we made to them outside of the regular renewal cycle, and they kind of thought, I don't think so. And that's just where it ended.
Okay. And would we, this would go away if DPW moves, possibly? Like if this Whitefish Bay might not necessarily like the new location, or?
I think there's a lot of ifs there.
Yeah.
It might, but it might not.
Right.
I think it depends on a number of factors.
Okay.
Anybody else? Comments, questions? President McKay? I think given that we are in a situation where we are looking for a new location, there's a lot of things up in the air. With there being this split, I think if it was a different circumstance, it would be great to sort of create a new agreement that reflected the usage. But I think where we currently are right now, uncertainty of the future of transfer station, it's probably best to, stay consistent and just create an extension based off of the current agreement to get us through into the next couple of years. And the life cycle of this transfer station is up probably in 27, 28, 20, probably around that time, right? Did I read that? Is that probably?
There's two compactors. They're staggered. They don't
Okay, one of them is.
basically
One's up.
each. Yeah.
One's up in 27. Okay. So I would be leaning towards, I guess, basically an olive branch with Whitefish Bay and just creating an extension to what we currently have. That would be where I would lean. I'm not sure if you guys agree, if you want to draw up a new contract or stay consistent, but that's where I would stand.
I agree. I think, given that a lot of this might be changing anyway, I don't think it's worth both villages paying their attorney to draft up a new agreement.
Mhm.
I think we probably just get through this for another year or two. We'll see what happens. Right.
Same.
Right. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I move to recommend an extension to the village board for.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. Next on the agenda is we have a Public Works organizational analysis recommendation review. And that's the review of the transfer station operation. No, that's from my bad. That's the part of the packet for the transfer station. The next item is to discuss and provide direction for safe streets and roads for the implementation grant. This evening we have Bart.
Thank you, Trustee Ursink. So as you're familiar with, the village has participated in 2 previous Safe Streets and Roads for All grants through Milwaukee County. The first one has provided funding for a countywide comprehensive safety action plan. That plan has been adopted by the county as of earlier this year. A local action plan is under development, and we've been told will be available for review later this summer for adoption at the end of the summer. So that first grant is still actually still working. However, because the county action plan has been adopted, we are eligible to apply for implementation grants of any recommendations within that larger safety action plan. And so we also are subsequently doing a demonstration activity that's not related to this, but there's a lot of safe streets and roads for all stuff happening. So I just wanted to make sure this is clear. We are eligible for this based on the county's adoption of the comprehensive safety action plan. Within that plan, they identified Lake Drive and Capitol Drive as the 2 corridors of concern. So any potential implementation grant should, it's not required to, but it should match the recommendations of that plan. Leanne and I did meet once we found out this implementation grant was an option, just to go over the possible countermeasures that are listed within that county-wide action plan. And based on recent evaluation of Capitol Drive and things that we have looked at and things that are in the bike ped plan and possibilities, we've identified 3 things that potentially could align with recommended countermeasures. One being to study or implement leading pedestrian intervals. Second would be to improve crossings with additional signage. And the third would be more capital intensive to raise pedestrian crossings and or intersections. So those 3 things are definitely listed as countermeasures within the countywide plan that we could go for. We could apply for other things and see, whether or not the reviewing panel agrees, but those are very specifically in there. So that's kind of what is in here. Just interested as to whether or not the committee wants to provide direction to staff to pursue any or all of those. I did also follow up with the county with respect to whether or not they'd be submitting a grant, and they did indicate that they think they will be. They have not identified their projects yet, but they do think that a multi-jurisdictional application would be beneficial. So it is possible that we could ask them to apply for our projects, and they would deal with administration, construction, local match, and everything. So in an ideal world, we could partner with a larger countywide application. But to do that, we'd have to identify what projects we want them to apply for. So the grant application is due at the end of, or June 26th, I should say. We have a couple of meetings if we need to discuss it, but I just wanted to get kind of a preliminary feel of what you were thinking with respect to whether or not we should pursue any of these. And if so, which ones, or if there's any questions. We would need to contact or work with DOT obviously on any more intensive modifications to the roadway itself, but signage, I think, probably not as much. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, trustee.
Oh, fantastic. This is a great, great option. And, you know, the materials in here that outline this sort of the Capitol Drive corridor